Hello and welcome to this quick guide on the runtime dev tools in Crayta. The runtime dev tools give game developers the opportunity to see a little bit more about what's going on behind the scenes of their game. You can open the runtime dev tools in either the editor or in the preview mode of a game you're working on. Just press O on the keyboard to open them up. The first tab is this console tab, and this is where you will spot any compiler errors that might be occurring, i.e. you've done something slightly wrong in your code and there's a syntax error, so something slightly out of place, or any print messages where you're sending yourself messages like this, whether they're strings like that, or you can also include things like your variable, so local myvar equals 5. If I put that there, put comma myvar, I can actually send myself the contents of a variable, which you can see there. So that's the console, and if you end up with too many messages, you can clear it pressing the clear button. This performance tab is really useful for looking at your game in terms of how efficient and optimized it is. If you find that the performance of your game is struggling a little bit, then it's definitely worth opening up this performance tab and going through these sub-tabs to see if you can identify where the problem might be. This is all about gathering information and trying to find clues to improve the performance of your game. The summary will give you a frames per second. As close to 60 is good. If it starts to drop really low, and you might see that on the graph rather than experience it in the game, then you might want to consider what might be going on in your game to cause that to happen. An example would be spawning 1,000 objects randomly in the middle of a game. You would probably expect to see maybe an FPS drop as the CPU and the GPU are busy trying to spawn all these objects and draw them on the screen. The world tab is a breakdown of every entity that is in your game world, including what type it is, what templates you've got going on, and what assets you're using. You can see how complex your game world is in this bar here. So the lower this is, the less complex and the more optimal your game is performing. The voxel tab tells you how complex the collisions of all of your voxel meshes are. Client CPU and server CPU will tell you about lines, any Lua code that is being executed on the client or the server, and it will give you the time in microseconds that it took to complete that. For example, here you can see that the client init was run on that. If I go over here and interact with this computer, you can see that the activity progress script called the onInteract function, it took 746 microseconds at its highest peak to run that function. Currently, it wasn't using, it was using zero microseconds of our CPU. So the CPU metric there, that's how much time it's taking out of a CPU cycle to run that particular function. And it's in microseconds, which is a millionth of a second. Server property change, don't worry about that. It's deprecated and it's going to be removed from future versions of Crayta. And the GPU is really concerned with drawing your graphics on your screen. So if you have lots of lights interacting with each other and shadows and translucency, then that's where your GPU might start to struggle. And if that might be the case, you can head over to this GPU tab and just see what's going on, how long these operations are taking. You can see, like on my very simple game, that's how long the GPU is taking to capture the screen and draw the screen. On a more complex game, it might take a lot longer, and if it starts to get too much and you're experiencing problems with frame rate, then it might be worth looking at this area and seeing whether some of your lights maybe need shadows turned off or whatever. And this final tab here, sub-tab here, is the UI tab, and this literally lists out all of the widgets you might have going on in your game world. The creator challenges and activities are the XP events, and they give you the opportunity as a developer to see your progress or players' progress with these challenges and activities in the preview mode. So, for example, this creator challenges, with this open, if I press Alt to hide the mouse cursor and go over to this button, I can complete that challenge by interacting with that button, and you can see that now I have 1 out of 1. So I have done this activity, I've done this creator challenge once, and it needed 1 time for it to be successful. I should also say, If you open your console, you can open it in the preview mode as well. And if you want to use your mouse to navigate between the tabs, press left Alt on your keyboard, and that will bring up the mouse and means you can navigate between these. If for some reason you close the console with the mouse still active by pressing O, you'll find that you can't really interact with your game. In order to stop that from happening, press O again to bring up the console, and then make sure you press left Alt and then O to close the console to make sure that you can essentially play your game again. And that's it. That's the Runtime DevTools. I hope that was useful. If you do hit any problems with your Lua coding, then don't be afraid to head over to our Discord and get in touch on the Ask Anything or the Lua help channels and ask for help and assistance. And I'm sure one of our community members or one of the game developers or community managers will be in touch to see how they can help and get your game working. And I really look forward to seeing your games in Crayta.